Jumping back into the Texture Generators menu, pull a cloud into your graph, and we have a 3D procedural cloud texture that can be used to drive a color input on the gradient. Once again, any one of these procedural texture generators needs a set of coordinates to manage the distribution of the cloud over the object. So in this case, I'm going to be using the texture projection, the original texture projection, which is my XZ projection, to drive this effect. So I'll plug the texture projection lookup output into the 3D cloud input, and then use the 3D cloud to drive color 1. So we get a 3D cloud fractal in the middle at the color 1 position, and if we go in here quickly, I can set the colors 1 and 2 to get a variation in the green shift. So I'll go in and set my colors here to a light green for color 1. I'll drag and drop the color widget and just change the color slightly here so I have a little bit of variety. And at this point we can start to work with the decay values. So the higher you work with the decay, the more contrast you get. So we can lower the decay just so we blend the colors together in an interesting way, but not too smoothed. Maybe something like that. And using the complexity, we can kind of work with the frequency of the effect. In more complexity, the more the colors are amplified together, the more noise you'll have in the texture between color 1 and color 2. So we can use the level minimum to act as a sort of blend between the two, sort of a transition, a smoothness, or very sharp, noisy contrast. So for a leaf, I'm going to want to have a fair bit of softness to the transitions. That looks pretty good there. And if I just increase the frequency of the texture a little bit more, I'm going to get a little bit more blending here. So take that down a little bit. There we go. That's good for the first color shift. I'm going to use this cloud 2 more times at color 2 and color 3. So I'll Control C, Control V to copy. And I'll actually just close this up as my graph can get a little bit large with these expanded full size. So color 2 will be my next one to drive. Notice it just uses the single color from color 1, the bright color. Again, until we use the texture coordinates that we've generated from the lookup to drive the effect, we don't get that shift. So once again, let's just use some variety here. I'll take the complexity on this one down a little bit. Maybe I'll increase the contrast between the two of them, or sorry, decrease the contrast. So a little more contrast at the tips. Up the level decay a little bit. And slightly shift the colors. I'll add a little bit of yellowing at the tips here. But again, try and keep that into the yellowy greens if I can. Okay, that looks good there. And then finally use the same to drive color 3. Copy and paste. Kind of minimize that. And plug into color 3, and of course use the same texture projection lookup to drive the transition. And if I dive into color 3's input, again do some slight variations there. So we have a very interesting leaf color to work with. If I blend this back in with my original pattern now, I'll go back to my 2D gradient, and I'll just use the mix 2 colors result to drive my diffuse. We have our leaf color here. And again, this might be pretty intense, so I can even drive the saturation of the green up a little bit higher and the overall luminance a little lower. Great, so our procedural shader looks like it's ready to go. I might actually want to turn this into a compound though in order to access some of the features of this group. The problem is that I have a lot of inputs that I could possibly access, and if I expand them all, I'm going to be here forever looking for the proper attribute to set. So let's look at turning this into a compound shader.